Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into something that affects absolutely every single one of us, yet it almost always feels totally overwhelming and unpredictable. I'm talking about human conflict. Now, we usually experience conflict as this messy, random burst of emotional chaos, right? But what if it isn't? What if it's actually a highly predictable system? In our time together today, we're going to learn how to see conflict not as some mysterious force that just swoops in and ruins our day, but as a legible pattern of needs, perceptions, threats, and responses. Because the truth is, once you understand this system, you can see conflict so much more clearly and respond to it much more calmly.
We have all been there. Someone leaves a dirty cup on the counter, or maybe they send a slightly brief text message, and suddenly you feel this intense rush of frustration. Why does a tiny, seemingly insignificant comment sometimes ruin your entire day? Well, it's because conflict rarely feels like a simple disagreement about facts. It feels intensely personal. Think about a busy marketplace on a normal day. Everything's flowing beautifully. But if one vendor suddenly parks their stall right dead center in the walkway, people don't just react to the wooden cart itself. They react to the feeling of being delayed, crowded, or pushed aside. Human conflict works exactly the same way. We react to the feeling, not just the object.
Okay, let's really dive into this gap between what happens and what it means. Imagine a raw event, a closed door. That's just a fact. But the interpretation? That might be, I am shutting you out. Two people can witness the exact same event and react in completely opposite ways because the human mind immediately asks, what does this mean? Is this about me? Think of this interpretation kind of like a camera filter on your phone. The original scene is exactly the same, but that filter changes the tone, the brightness, the whole mood entirely. The conflict lives in the filter, not the fact.
Which brings us to a sort of golden rule of human friction. People do not fight only over facts. They fight over what the facts seem to say about them. Conflict truly kicks off when a message is experienced as a direct threat to a person's core needs or their place in the relationship. When that happens, it instantly stops being a casual conversation about a late reply or a forgotten chore. It becomes a high-stakes debate about respect and value.
So let's peel back the layers and look at the hidden machinery here. How exactly do we go from a simple event to full-blown escalation?
Since we know conflict is personal, we have to look beneath the surface. There is an incredibly predictable engine driving this, and it plays out in 6 clear steps. 1. An event happens. 2. Our mind instantly assigns a meaning to it. 3. If that meaning is negative, it triggers a feeling of threat. 4. Our body and mind immediately seek protection. 5. We have a visible reaction to protect ourselves. And 6. That reaction hits the other person, kicking off a self-feeding cycle. The catch here is that our minds are so incredibly fast, we usually blow right past the meaning and threat stages without even realizing it, and suddenly find ourselves right at reaction.
But what exactly is triggering that threat? What are we actually protecting? Well, we're guarding our deepest human needs. Things like dignity, belonging, control, fairness, love, status, and safety. When one of these feels even slightly at risk, your nervous system doesn't sit around waiting for a polite debate. It treats the situation like physical danger. Imagine accidentally touching a hot pan on the stove. You don't pause to write a thoughtful essay on heat transfer, right? Your hand just recoils instantly. Your body protects first and explains later. Emotionally speaking, conflict works the exact same way.
Here's a really crucial takeaway. A protective response can be perfectly understandable without being remotely helpful. People rarely argue just for the sake of arguing. They might raise their voice because they desperately want to be taken seriously, or they might withdraw to protect themselves from feeling totally overwhelmed. These are just strategies for reducing inner discomfort. Think of it like a cheap smoke alarm. It's loud, it's annoying, and it's totally imprecise. But its job isn't to play a nice melody. Its job is to signal danger. Our reactions are often just clumsy smoke alarms.
But what happens when your smoke alarm goes off and the sheer noise of it triggers someone else's alarm? That is the collision of protections.
Let's look at how this actually plays out. Let's say one person pushes hard for clarity, because to them uncertainty feels deeply threatening, but their partner, or their coworker, avoids discussion because the pressure itself is what feels threatening to them. Most of the time, both people are trying to protect something completely legitimate, but they're using totally incompatible strategies. It's literally like two people trying to shove a heavy oak table through a tiny doorway. One is yanking left, the other is pulling right, and the table just gets completely wedged in the frame. Neither person is trying to break the table, they're just using conflicting methods to solve the problem, and getting stuck.
When you finally see it this way, it changes everything. Instead of pointing fingers and asking, who's the bad guy here or who started this, The real question becomes, what system of protection is now colliding with another system of protection? When someone raising their voice causes the other person to shut down, the conflict isn't even about the original issue anymore. It's entirely about how each person is reacting to the other's reaction. It's like holding two mirrors facing each other. The reflection just multiplies endlessly.
Now, it's worth noting that not all of these collisions end in an explosion. Sometimes the conflict just stalls.
The tension basically freezes into these rigid patterns. You've got the pursue-withdraw dynamic, where one person desperately presses for contact while the other pulls away just to get some relief. Or the criticize-defend loop, a battle between one person needing accountability and the other needing self-protection. And then you're silence guessing, where one person stays quiet to avoid exposure, which leaves the other person terrified, desperately trying to fill in the gaps. On the surface, a stalled conflict like this might look pretty calm, but make no mistake, it is not resolved, it's just contained. And contained conflict, it always leaks out later, usually as sarcasm, emotional distance, or keeping a silent scoreboard.
And this brings us to a massive factor in all of this, the element of time. This is where a simple misunderstanding hardens into a deep pattern of trust, or a lack of it.
Let's trace how a loop solidifies over time. Imagine a basic workplace scenario. On day 1, somebody delays replying to an important message. Honestly, it's a minor event. But by day 14, if it happens a couple more times, that delay is no longer just a delay. The filter has changed. Now it's interpreted as a deliberate sign of being ignored. Or maybe the person being chased down for a reply starts feeling micromanaged and controlled. Fast forward to day 30. The original specific event doesn't even matter anymore. The whole thing is morphed into a chronic pattern of distrust. Every new event is instantly measured against the heavy emotional memory of all the previous ones.
You always hear people say, oh, just give it time, it'll blow over. But honestly, time alone does not heal a thing. Time merely rehearses the exact same story if the interpretation doesn't change. Giving it space only works if that time actually allows the heat to dissipate, the threat levels to drop, and new perspectives to form. If the emotional charge and that underlying filter remain exactly the same, the passing days are just digging the rut deeper and deeper into the road.
So how do we actually get out of the rut? How do we find our calm influence and change the meaning?
It all starts with fundamentally redefining what conflict is. It is a predictable system of meaning, threat, and protection, not random emotional chaos. Realizing this actually gives you a bit of a superpower. You can step back and diagnose the machinery, kind of like a mechanic listening to a car engine. Once this system becomes legible to you, you really don't need to panic when tensions rise. You don't have to force peace, and you don't have to win the argument. You simply need to stop feeding the loop. When you can separate the heat of the moment from the meaning and recognize a harsh response as self-protection rather than intentional cruelty, the threat level just naturally drops. And when the threat drops, the conflict naturally cools.
I want to leave you with something to try in your own life. The very next time you feel that familiar hot rush of frustration or you see someone else getting super defensive, just hit pause. Ask yourself, what is the underlying protection here and how can I soften the meaning? Because once you see the pattern, it's not a mystery anymore. And once it's not a mystery, it's no longer in charge. You are. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.